Today I'll be taking a look at the Antec 1. It is a mid ATX tower, all black. It supports micro ATX, ATX, and ITX motherboards. It has 3 external 5¼ inch drive bays. It has no 3½ inch external drive bays. It comes with 5 internal 3½ inch bays, 2 2¼ inch drive bays, and 7 PCI Express expansion slots on the back. The side door panel has a mount for a 120mm fan. It is not filtered. It has one top mounted 120mm fan and one rear mounted 120mm fan. The case itself, very stylish. At the top and front of the case there is a microphone jack and a headphone jack and 2 USB 3.0 connectors, and it has an included USB 2.0 adapter. The top again has a 120mm fan mounted facing outward. The bottom of the case has a spot for a 120mm fan in the center, dust filter for the bottom facing fan for the power supply, some basic rubber feet. It has a spot for a solid state hard drive or a 2¼ inch hard drive to be mounted at the bottom, and room for a 140mm or 120mm fan for the bottom. It comes with a 120mm fan on the back. It has 7 PCI Express expansion slots, and it mounts a standard or extended power supply. The power supply is raised by some rubber standoffs on the bottom of the case, and it has 2 water cooling grommets, fairly good quality water cooling grommets on the back. The door panels are nice feeling powder coat, and they have a raised edge to help manage cables and give you some extra room in the case. Inside the case there's a fairly large cutout for cable routing behind the motherboard tray for the power cables. It comes with motherboard standoffs pre-installed for your standard ATX motherboard. The optical drive bays all have toolless clips, and the top drive bay does not. The hard drive cages have a honeycomb pattern outward facing. All of the drives load from the back. There again is the fan spots on the bottom, dust filtering. There is a ledge right above the power supply where the PCI Express slots begin to add extra stability to the case. The PCI Express slot covers are not replaceable except for the uppermost slot, so that's something to think about if you plan on reusing this case. Both fans are mounted pulling air out of the case through the top and the back. At the top of the motherboard tray there is a small gap so that you can run 8-pin or 4-pin ATX power cable to the motherboard up through the back of the motherboard tray. There are a lot of holes for cable management throughout the case. Inside of the optical drive bay, there's not really a lot of good places to route the cables from the front of the case out through the back. As you can see, there's sort of a problem with the top of the optical bay cage. You can't really route the cables directly behind it. You'd either have to go down through the front and out the back to get the cables for the front panel out of the way, or you have to pull them around through the front and send them out past the hard drive cage so that you can see the cables from the side. There is a hole down through the front, but you have to run the cables beside whatever optical drive you put in. There is a front panel HD audio connector, a USB 3 connector, and all of the power and LED connectors. The cooler cutout for the motherboard is huge. The back of the motherboard tray has a rubber peg to help add stability to the board because they went with such a large cutout. In the hard drive bay, there is room for, again, 3.5-inch hard drives. There is no room to route those cables from the front panel except for a small gap behind the optical bay. If you were to go over top of the optical drive, you'd only have a small gap to try and send all of the cords through, and you wouldn't be able to get the USB 3 cable through there. So one of the other options that I was looking at was putting them through this hole that leads up behind the front panel, and next to the optical bay you have a fairly large area, a couple of inches or so behind the optical bay, or behind the hard drive bay, to hide the cables from the power supply. In that space you do have room for a 120mm fan, but there's no dust filtering. It comes with your standard manual. You have a USB 3 to USB 2 adapter. There are several hard drive mounting plates to mount on your hard drive for toolless access. And you have a lot of screws and pins and motherboard standoffs. I am not a big fan of Antec. I'm a fan of all black interiors, and they don't have a lot of all black options from the previous releases of cases, and I think this was a very welcome upgrade to Antec's case line. I'd like to see more like it. Again, there is no dust filtering, and the front panel is extremely hard to get off. Besides some minor cable managing issues in the front panel, and the lack of a front-mounted 120mm fan or 140mm fan, I would say that it is in fact the best case viewed for that price range. So, this is Daedalus PC.